And turn your mic on first. Let's do what we do and do it properly and get out and enjoy the evening. So, first, I need approval of the minutes from May 29, please.
So moved.
And seconder? Seconded, thank you. All those in favor? And those opposed? Thank you very much. 1.2 on the agenda, public consultation results. Jody, this is an interesting presentation.
Thank you. So before I get started, I just wanted to thank everyone again. We had so many people within the organization help us put this together. We had a lot of support from the finance committee. We've heard the chair and the mayor on the radio. But really, at the end of the day, when we put the project together, the unknown for us was participation. And without it, it wouldn't have worked out for us. We wouldn't have got our themes. So the public participation in this was what we needed, and we achieved it. So really thank the public for that. All right, so within your kit, you have a detailed report as well. You might want to reference it as we go through these slides. So we had a series of questions we asked at the end of the budget simulator around demographics, and we just wanted to point out the equal participation across all the wards. And then when you look at Appendix D within your detailed report, you'll see the results of all the questions that were asked. So I know one of the bigger concerns was making sure the validity of the results. And one of the things that we were able to do was get IP addresses. We didn't actually take the addresses, we took the coding for them so that we could do a series of tests. We did 5, and they're detailed out in your Appendix E of your report. And the biggest thing to note is after we went through those tests, nothing of interest or concern was in the results. So we considered basically all results as valid. So in summary of the results, we had, if you recall, a goal of 400. We received 553 responses. First week was phenomenal. We were checking it every day, and it was coming in like wildfire. We were super excited. And then, of course, it starts to slow down a bit, which is why we kept it to our 3-week period. We knew that would happen, but it still was a very exciting process to go through. 35% actually balanced their budgets, and that left 358 that left a deficit. So the important thing to note is when you take the average of the people that left the deficit, they still left a gap of $5 million. So when you kind of go through the budget, you would see on your left-hand side, if you balanced it and it would turn green, the average would have showed a $5 million left to deal with. So some of the key themes, tax rate results. It was mixed. 50% chose to either maintain or decrease. 50% chose or would tolerate a slight increase. We provided a table below because within the results, because of the demographic questions, we could normalize out the renters and non-residents just to see the difference. There's very slight variances there. So then when you look at the service area results, nowhere was left untouched. Everyone received a slight reduction. The ranges were wide. We had 1.5 to 19%, depending on the service. And then here highlights where the highest and lowest were. But if you go to your table 2, page 5 of your report, it'll give you a breakdown of every service area. So the highest ones were in economic development, transit services, recreation programming, sports facilities, and one-stop shop development, property compliance programs. The average lowest for So the average lowest reductions were in road maintenance and snow control and sidewalks. So this was based on average percentages. And then when you look at the average reductions based on dollar amounts, these were the top 4 that would take the biggest dollar amount reduction. And the accumulation of all that was 3.1 million of the reductions that were chosen. So then beyond the service areas, we also had 2 qualitative questions we asked people, one around revenue generation and one around community facilities feedback. So again, it's pretty impressive that we received 189 comments from people on revenue generation. They would have taken the time to read through the suggestions and provide comments. When we went through all the comments, the most common ones that were discussed are listed here. So the non-resident user fees and taxes, tolls on city roads, charges to neighboring communities for services, and taxation of heavy industry. And then when we asked for feedback on community facilities results, we had provided a table to show the allocation of the operating costs amongst the different municipalities and then the capital costs that we take on. So 106 respondents commented, generally acknowledged the importance of these facilities to life in the city. And then many kind of commented on either an alternate funding model or higher contributions coming from outside users. So within it as well, there was an area where you could have your overall feedback. And one of the themes that kept coming up over and over again was showcasing our positive attributes in the city, all the amazing things the city can offer, and that we should work on building that awareness. And so here we've just kind of copied 2 of many of the comments that were received, but just to give you an idea of what people are saying about the city. So then we needed to have a well-executed communication strategy, and we wouldn't have been able to get the word out without it. We had significant support from our CI team communications, Nancy leading the communication strategy, and this is just giving you some of the facts on what we received. Again, it was kind of exciting as we go, because every day we'd receive the feedback, and some days we were the #1 hit on the city website, or people were spending over 10 minutes just looking into this and investigating it, so it was quite interesting to watch. And then we had all of our service area videos as well. So that is a very high-level summary of it. Again, the report's in your kit, but I will take any questions, or our team will at this time.
Committee, questions, comments, please? All right, I've got it. Just wondering, Jody,
Sir, gosh darn. A couple of things. A couple of things surprised me. One was the amount of people that would consider a tax increase. And I've had time to talk to staff, and you were in the conversation, and we wondered how that came to be. That really knocked me over, quite frankly. And there was some discussion, and I don't know whether, Nancy, we could pull these out of the figures, whether we're all speculating or not. There was some discussion as to the relative toughness of the exercise and not being able to complete it, and then doing so by raising the taxes. So I've cut and I've looked at it numerous times, and I've taken it down as far as I can, and all of a sudden I'm going, just put the taxes up 3 cents.
Right.
So can you comment on that? I know it's pretty vague. Was there any comment in regards to that? Did they say, look, I've tried, and the only way out of this equation is increasing revenue and thereby taxes?
No, there was no direct comment saying that, but
Right.
to consider the fact that around 30% balance the budget, in order to do that, they would have had to really increase their taxes to really be able to do it. It was a very challenging project. So if some people's objective was, I really want to balance this budget, they would increase their taxes.
So that was the second part of my question. Of those that balanced the budget, do we know what percentage of those that balanced it used an increase in taxes to do so?
I can get that number and confirm it.
All right. And lastly, before I go elsewhere, what are we going to do to tell our story here? What's the next step in
Well, the plan-
making this public? And
Yeah, well, the plan for this is certainly that these themes are going to be used in the long-term financial plan. That was the ultimate goal, so we'll see them in that plan. I know that there's been different things going on with the budget, going through the budget, but this is available for everyone to see.
we don't make sure that back in the corner they've got a copy. All right. Thank you.
I'm sure people will be very interested to see how, if they took the time to do the budget simulator, to see how everyone else responded.
Thanks, Jody. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you very much. Start with a huge thanks. I mean, I know the budget exercise was difficult, but you know, the fact that we even got to do it in the first place, I know it was months and months and months of work. You know, the feedback that you know, when I think we started, we wanted to engage and educate and dialogue, and I think you hit a home run, Jody and Nancy and Kevin and everyone else that were involved, because I think that's exactly what it did. It was, you know, for anybody that loves numbers, there was a period of, you know, during the budget simulator live times where social media was alive with talk about numbers and budgets, and that doesn't happen every day. What I thought was interesting as an observation is that not only were people talking about it, but actually they were talking about how difficult it was. It almost, there was a wave of, sounds funny to say, but there became a wave of sympathy for folks that had to actually deal with this. So it's, you know, I saw comments like it was tough. I gave up. I just raised the taxes. That was the easiest way, just to, you know, to try and make some of the pain go away. So I thought, you know, some of the unofficial themes, but some of the official themes that you've gleaned out here was sort of interesting. Commissioner, is 1 cent still about $700,000? So just for, you know, for perspective, even when you put the taxes up 3 cents, it's not a whole lot of money in the big theme of what we're trying to address. I thought that in a way those that did the budget simulator seemed to be quite aware of the importance of the conversation of regional equity. You know, that was a strong theme, I think, that came out as well. And again, I think from day one it was about what themes might we see, but I think there's no question in my mind these tough challenges ahead are at the finance committee and at the council and at the staff to do. I mean, I think it hit. It was an A+ from my perspective on what we set out to do and what we achieved in terms of engaging with folks. So again, I'll end with a thanks again, Jody, Nancy, Stephanie, everybody, Kevin, and the hundreds that I've forgotten. So thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess, Jody, it's all interesting stuff. Specifically, although Ward 1 didn't come out as the highest participation rate, Ward 4 did. So congratulations to Donna and Councillor Hickey. I noticed that right off the bat. But anyways, we came in a close third. So anyways, it was close. But anyways, we're quite there. So it means I'd say the uptown area has more millennials. Maybe that's it. But regardless, I found the comments to probably be one of the most interesting features. And I think they were really positive comments, a lot of them. And so I know everybody in this room's read it, but if it gets captured somewheres, I found one that was particularly interesting. It's time people realize that they must participate and live in this city if it is to survive. I believe that Saint John has the potential to become a model city in Canada, and we've inherited so many of the building blocks of quality cities like Boston, New York, Halifax, and Montreal. I guess those types of things, even after completing the budget simulator exercise, didn't dampen people's spirits in terms of what they saw and envisioned with the community that they live in. And it was good to see that a lot of the comments that were posted, or at least that were shared in the staff report, were still they weren't darkened or dampened by the challenges in the exercise itself, but that they saw more potential than setbacks. So thank you to you, Nancy, the team. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
That's all.
Thanks, Councillor Norton. Good recognition of that as well. Thank you. I need a potion, yeah. We talked about that earlier and closed. Yes, I'm sorry. We need a motion to receive and file, please. Yeah, and seconded? Thank you kindly. All those in favor? Those opposed? Thanks, Jody. 1.3. Municipal tax reform. Again, City Manager, you want to kick that off first, please?
Yes, please, Chair, members of the committee. Chair and members of the committee, the reason this agenda item is on the open session of Finance Committee is that in the last open session of Common Council, when we were discussing the Sustaining Saint John three-part plan document, a question was asked for some additional detail on a proposal that we had submitted to the provincial government about our proposed Phase 1 of municipal tax reform. And although we gave a very quick reply to that question, we thought it would be prudent to expose in a little bit more detail that proposal to the members of the committee, although you are already aware of it, but also to the public at large. So with that, I'd like to introduce the Deputy City Manager, Neil Jacobson, who will begin the presentation.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Finance Committee. The Commissioner of Finance and I will be co-delivering this presentation. I will be providing some background and context, while Commissioner Fudge will do a deeper dive into the financial implications of our recommended Phase 1 of municipal taxation reform. I should mention up front that this proposal before the Finance Committee today was one of many sustainability themes actively discussed and explored within the mandate and work of the Joint Government of New Brunswick City of Saint John Municipal Sustainability Working Group. What is before you tonight is not a new concept or proposal to the province. Large industry is an essential component of the city's and southern New Brunswick's economy and creates thousands of local and regional direct and indirect high-paying jobs. Saint John region generates between 20 to 25% of the province's gross domestic product, or GDP, and 60% of the province's exports, largely attributable to the presence of heavy industry. The province derives hundreds of millions of revenue on an annual basis from these industries through provincial sales tax, fuel tax, utility tax, and personal and corporate income tax. While Saint John is extremely proud of its industrial character and highly skilled industrial workforce, as well as the ongoing contributions of our major local industries to our local economy, the city bears a particularly high proportion of the costs and impacts as a host community for New Brunswick's highest concentration of heavy industrial activities. The city and its residents are responsible for providing core municipal infrastructure and services to these industries, including protective services, and must contend with the issues such as 724 industrial activity, road wear and deterioration, environmental impacts, public safety events and associated impacts, and the land use and property valuation issues associated with multiple residential neighborhoods coexisting with heavy industry. The proposal before you this evening provides a mechanism to allow the provincial portion of the heavy industrial property taxes currently collected within the City of Saint John to remain within the city for the benefit of our citizens and the delivery of core municipal services, including, by way of example, protective services, roads, infrastructure renewal, transit, and recreation. The proposed municipal heavy industry property tax reform recommends that 100% of the property tax collected from large industry in Saint John stays within the City of Saint John. This would be an interim step in the much broader or comprehensive review of municipal taxation issues committed to by the province of New Brunswick in the recently released Sustaining Saint John three-part plan. A similar approach could be implemented province-wide for all municipalities hosting heavy industrial operations or activities with minimal incremental impact for the province. Based on Service New Brunswick data, the city's total industry tax base is currently $827 million. This includes both light and heavy industry. Industry accounts for approximately 17% of the city's total tax base, with a breakdown of 9% heavy industry and 8% light industry. Heavy industry located in Saint John pays approximately $12 million in property tax to the city on an annual basis. Heavy industry located in Saint John pays approximately $9 million in incremental property tax to the province on an annual basis. From an industrial profile perspective, Saint John is home to Atlantic Canada's highest concentration of heavy industry, including the largest oil refinery in Canada, the country's only LNG receiving terminal and regasification plant, a pulp and paper mill, two paper processing facilities, multiple power generation plants, and associated electricity transmission infrastructure, two major international natural gas pipelines, an active international deep water port, a crude oil marine receiving terminal, a refined petroleum products export terminal, a crude oil receiving facility, two major rail carriers and rail yards, both east and west, and multiple smaller industrial operations located in 3 industrial parks and within the Port of Saint John. The city is also in close proximity to a nuclear power plant, with emergency response services provided by the City of Saint John. Slide 6 provides a graphical representation of the city's heavy industrial activities, which was prepared by Chief Clifford and the Saint John Fire Department. Each of these industrial activities has their own unique land use footprints and associated impacts, but combined, they present Eastern Canada's highest cumulative industrial risk profile. Slide 7 provides a representation of one of our community's unique land use attributes, the coexistence of heavy industrial activities with residential neighborhoods. This coexistence is part of who we are as a community and has largely been a mutually respectful, cooperative, and economically beneficial relationship. However, we do face some unique challenges as a municipality as a result of the city's concentration of heavy industrial activities, environmental impacts, truck and rail traffic in both East and West Saint John, EMO activations such as last year's butane pipeline leak in a refinery event, and the ongoing challenges associated with the AIM facility located on port property within the city's inner harbor as examples. Slide 8 provides a more detailed aerial map of East Saint John, which showcases the coexistence of heavy industrial activities with residential neighborhoods. Slide 9 provides a more detailed aerial map of West Saint John, which also showcases the coexistence of heavy industrial activities with residential neighborhoods. The proposed municipal heavy industry property tax reform immediately addresses a clear inequity with respect to the distribution of municipal industrial tax revenue within the province of New Brunswick. It effectively allocates large industrial tax revenue to the local level in Saint John, where the impacts of heavy industry are directly felt. It reflects a truly unique community situation. Saint John is home to Atlantic Canada's highest concentration of heavy industry, which is also a huge contributor to the provincial economy, GDP, and exports. There are very few municipalities in New Brunswick that have a comparably high concentration of industry. None have the economic impact that Saint John is home to. It does not create any immediate new taxes or any new or incremental tax burden for large industry. It contributes in a significant way to addressing the city's pending 2021 fiscal cliff and growing structural deficit. And with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Fudge.
Thank you. Just add a few slides here with respect to some financial context. The first slide here is a reflection of the amount of provincial property tax that we estimate based on GIS information that the province of New Brunswick benefits from having a property tax in the city of Saint John. And I'll start with highlighting we did have a fair taxation study conducted by external experts, and Enid Slack and Harry Kitchen. You'll see on the side of the slide the quote from those experts, and I'll read it. The property tax is a good tax for local government, but not necessarily appropriate to pay for redistribution services provided by the provincial government, such as education and healthcare. The province should gradually get out of levying property taxes. Moreover, eliminating the provincial property taxes would reduce the pressure on municipal property tax rates and increase transparency in the property tax system. It would also provide municipalities with needed tax room. So in regards to the GIS data and our estimates, the province draws approximately somewhere between $40 and $45 million of provincial property taxes out of the City of Saint John. In comparison to the unconditional grant that the city receives most recently would be approximately $17 million. The city has been consistent with its position that property taxes should be the exclusive domain for municipalities, and with this with this room provided to municipalities, the City of Saint John would not need an unconditional grant from the province of New Brunswick. It's interesting to drill into some of the assessment data when it comes to the industrial tax base in the City of Saint John. We looked at it and benchmarked City of Saint John with the City of Moncton and Fredericton. And for purposes of this slide here, you might notice that earlier we had over $800 million in tax base, and this one's showing $786 million. For purposes of benchmarking in this slide, we actually excluded the LNG assessment, given that it would overstate the reduction for the city in percentage, considering the fact that the assessment was originally it's complex because the assessment was originally $299 million. It got reassessed to $98 million. But it was further complicated by the fact that the assessment was artificially fixed for a period of time at $18 million. So we just took that rate out of the equation in order to properly benchmark this slide. But it is interesting, given the city's reputation as being a large industrial base, that over the last, since 2013, the city's industrial tax base has lagged both Moncton and Fredericton. In fact, the assessment has dropped 3.68% since 2013. While Moncton's growth industrial base growth has exceeded 20%, and Fredericton around 17%. I guess there's a conclusive comment on this slide, and that industrial assessments in Saint John have been declining while large industry has been investing hundreds of millions of dollars into their operations year over year. Big turnaround projects, big investments, yet not reflected in the assessment base. Growth in new industrial investment is to be celebrated, but the city's property tax revenue from industry has actually declined, being a contributing factor for the city's sustainability challenges. So this is just the next couple slides, just a comparison of tax base. In 2013, the industrial tax base, the City of Saint John was $1.2 billion, it was $1,189 million, compared to today at $1,142 million, again excluding LNG. And in terms of actual property taxes paid, the property taxes paid in 2013 was $21 million, $21.1 million to the City of Saint John, compared to today at $20.4 million. This next slide is just also interesting. We looked at redistribution of heavy industry tax, and we wanted to really look at what the impact would be from a provincial lens compared to a municipal lens. And we want to throw some data up here on the slide for revenue. So we looked at the actual budget estimates from the province of New Brunswick for comparing the year 2019. Their year ends March 31st, so it's March 31st, 2019 compared to 2020. So the revenue in the 2019 budget for the province was $9.4 billion that was estimated, compared to the most recent budget at $9.8 billion. It's a $418 million increase, which is 4.4% increase year over year. You compare that to the City of Saint John. The City of Saint John the revenues were $156 million in 2018. $160 million in 2019 for an increase of 2.67%. That 2.67% is artificially high because you'll notice down lower on that table you'll see short-term financial assistance from the province, which will end in 2020. And that represented 50% of the increase. I guess that was a 50% increase for that particular line item for between 2018 and 2019. So I guess when we look at tax revenues, tax revenue has increased 1.86% for the City of Saint John, compared to 5.61% for the province of New Brunswick. When you look at unconditional grant for the City of Saint John, it went from 16.6 million to 17.3, which is a 4.52% increase. When you look at the federal conditional and unconditional transfers, you see approximately about an 8% increase for the province of New Brunswick. And when you look at the estimated $9 million impact of redistribution of provincial taxes, you'll see below under the provinces table a figure of 0.09%, so 1/10% of the overall revenues for the province of New Brunswick, compared to would have 5.62% for the City of Saint John when you compare $9 million on a $160 million budget. This is a same sort of benchmark slide, but it looks at the last 5 years for revenues and federal transfers versus unconditional grant and tax revenues. So you'll see the province of New Brunswick's estimate for tax revenues in 2015/16 was $4.027 billion. And then in 2019-20, it's $4.7 billion, 4.8 rounding. That's an increase of $763 million, or a 19% increase over that period of time. With respect to transfers, federal transfers, it was $2.8 billion in 2015. It's currently at almost $3.5 billion. So that's a $600 million increase for a 21% increase in revenues from the federal government. With respect to the City of Saint John, the budget revenues in 2015-16 was $118 million. Today it's $123 million. That's a 4% increase. And if you, I guess, normalize the short-term financial assistance, which will go away, and you look just strictly at our unconditional grant, in 2016 our unconditional grant was almost $21 million. In the most recent year, it's 17.3. So it's declined by $3.6 million, which is a decline of 17%. So overall, revenues for the city, when you combine tax revenues and the provincial unconditional grant, over that period of time between 2016 and the most current budget, is about a 1% increase. So I think I'll just conclude really reconfirming the comments made by Mr. Jacobson. Phase 1 reform alleviates the province from having to make any future special funding requirements with respect to the $10.4 million in 2020. Provides immediate sustainability solution as the city implements a series of sustainability and restructuring action items. It redistributes $9 million in property tax revenue, which is supported by Fair Taxation Report experts, which would be transformational for the city, almost represent a 6% percent of the budget versus 0.1% for the province of New Brunswick. It can be positioned as an important very first step in municipal tax reform and a comprehensive review of municipal tax system by the province of New Brunswick, and it does not require newest tax assessment capabilities or resources from the province. So with that, between myself and Mr. Jacobson, we can answer any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. If we're going to have this conversation with the province about reallocating the $9 million from heavy industry to the city, one of the comments made was, a similar approach could be province-wide. I mean, certainly heavy industry doesn't use city streets, city emergency services, anything to the same level of a resident. So I certainly understand and accept that. The province, in a lot of the discussions, has said we will do good things that are good not only for the City of Saint John, but are good for all the municipalities in the province. So even though it's a $9 million reallocation ask for the City of Saint John, do we know really what we're asking the province to commit to province-wide in that ask? So if it's 9 million for the city of Saint John, what would it be province-wide?
I guess when you look at that, we would have to look at the specific detailed assessment information for every city in the province of New Brunswick. Our estimate, they're very high level, we think would be less than $20 million on a provincial basis, but we'd have to verify that information.
No, I appreciate that. Just as we're having the discussions, I think that's important information to know. Certainly, you know, as organizations have come before the city of Saint John and said, you know, we're asking for this kind of allocation from your community grants, and we know for the city of Saint John it's only 0.002% of the budget, et cetera. So I think it's important information to have when we're discussing with our provincial partners, that if we're asking for 9 million for this for the city of Saint John, you know, and an MLA says, well, you know, so now when my friends around the province ask me, so we're talking about high level $20 million if they rolled the program out province-wide.
Yeah, and we're also not talking all industry. This
Yes,
is
just
heavy industry, areas that are zoned heavy industry. So you'll recall on the pie chart, there was $22 million in revenue that the city, we'd be only talking with the 9%, the heavy industry portion.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to be clear for anybody who might want to, we're not talking about the corner store.
Correct.
This is heavy industry.
Heavy
We
industry.
had them listed up on the screen. Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Very, very interesting presentation. I'll go a little detailed, a couple of quick detailed questions first. One, Kevin, Mr. Fudge, when I go back to, I don't know what slide number, industrial assessment-based growth from 2013 to 2019 between Moncton, Fredericton. Yeah, sorry, that slide. I'm just trying to wrap my head around that. Does that mean Moncton and Fredericton are growing in an industrial category that doesn't have M&E exemption? Is that what?
Yeah, well, the M&E exemption is provincial-wide application through legislation. You'll see the numbers actually on this slide.
Okay.
Annual tax base industry, St. John, Moncton, and Fredericton. So you can see in Moncton, it was 400. My eyes aren't that great these days. 461.
Yeah.
And in 2019, it's 556.
Okay. Okay, so, okay, and then the same, I see the Fredericton numbers. So I think the theme on this slide is we were 786 in 2013, and we're 757.
And that's light and heavy industry. That's
Okay.
That's all industry on that slide, yes.
Okay, but, yeah, okay, so that's, I think I understand that. Okay, and then I guess just to comment on, I wrote down to myself here, I think we've been restructuring for years because by my math, you showed our revenue net being up about $1.5 million over 5 years, and likely our costs went up $12 to $15 million in that same period. Is that a fair?
I'd have to verify those numbers, but it sounds directionally correct.
Or even if I said if our costs went up a couple of $1 million a year?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, I just noted to self that we've been restructuring. We've been structuring for a long, long time. I guess, and then I'll just close. I just, because I think we get into this narrative in the community that for me, and I don't think for council, this isn't an anti-industry message. This is about a recognition of responsibilities and a step closer to balance. For me, that's what I think this conversation is about. I don't think there's a comparison east of Montreal to any community. I mean, that map you put up, Mr. Jacobson, of the industrial makeup of our community, and especially, I suspect, Ms. Hamilton, that if we were redesigning a community, we wouldn't probably wrap residential neighborhoods all around these types of industrial sites today. But look, we are where we are. But there's likely not a community east of Montreal that has that makeup. So it makes us very unique, I suspect. And then I just certainly my view, and I'm no economist, but I think we're dealing with a lot of rules from the 60s, and that the trickle-down economics of the 60s hasn't really worked in terms of tax base growth for the city. You know, it's like if we have, and again, this isn't an anti-industry comment, great, we're very happy to have all of these industrial assets here. We're looking for balance and that everybody was going to work and we would get the tax base because everybody would live in our community, but we know that that's not the case. We know that half of the population now lives outside the city. And then lastly, you know, I think our ask through the working group of us being able to keep this as first phase of tax reform at 0.09%. I appreciate the councillor's comment about the, you know, the bigger ask and impacts, but our revenue certainly didn't go up $418 million last year either. So, okay, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, just through you, Chair, to the worship, Mayor Darling. Just one, I was actually reviewing some interesting documents from the Benefits Blueprint Project, which was from over a decade ago, when we were looking at some significant new industrial investment in the community. And there was a significant amount of work that was done by all three levels of government when we were looking at those opportunities. And some of the findings from the Benefits Blueprint work showcased 94% of the benefits from large industrial investments flowing to the federal government and the province, and in the range of 6% would flow to the community. So the issue is these investments are hugely beneficial for all of us. The issue is just the balance and the allocation of those benefits. And that's, I think, what we were trying to showcase with this presentation.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
On, please. Thank you. So, has anyone got the slide deck just for a second, please? Thanks, Jody. So can I go back to the slide the mayor was talking about, the decrease in our tax base?
Am I going the right road?
And you're going, yeah, thank you. And while you get to that, I'll say that I think Councillor Sullivan's right. What's good for the goose should be good for all the ganders, and that I know we've made this presentation to the province of Brunswick, but I look at this as the first part of municipal tax reform for the entire province, and it's still only, I know it's a little bit of an estimate, 0.2% of their budget. It's a rounding error, all right? But it's so significant to the communities that would hold heavy industry within their borders. No, Jody, the one yeah, that one, please. Thank you. So what I would say this slide represents is that since I've been here, I know the province has come to us once and told us that the mills in the province were having a tough time, and they were going to take their assessment base down, and i.e. their taxes down. And when they came in November of 2014, it cost the city of Saint John $1.2 million ourselves. Not assessment base, $1.2 million of revenue, all right? So what that figure that would be hard in that figure, and also in the other two figures, they don't have the heavy industrial base that we have. They have some industrial base, I would say Fredericton, very little. Moncton some, but they don't have the heavy industrial base. And that's what they came to us after. We'd like to see it back. What came to mind when I was sitting with finance people at that time, I said, I understand that you want to help industry in the province. That's a good thing. Don't take our revenue from us. This is our revenue. Look to other aspects of what you collect. So with that, I'm asking for the same thing in reverse. This is our revenue. I'd like to keep it. We protect it with our fire and police, all right? We maintain it with our roads. I think we deserve it. I think it's a proper and reasonable ask, and it is the first part, I believe, it could be the first part in muni tax reform. So with that, City Manager, I understand that we have made this presentation to the province. I'm looking for some kind of motion from Finance Committee.
I believe at this time it's simply a receive and file.
Could I make a,
Or-
so we can do both, but I mean, could we make a receipt and file is fine. But why don't we, could we make a motion, Mr. Chairman? I'd make a motion that we send this presentation to our colleagues. I mean, this is a new packaged presentation. The conversation, certainly as I understand it, I've certainly had that conversation both with the government house leader and with the premier around and as province-wide. But certainly the assembly of this information, I think, was very good tonight. I don't know why we wouldn't send that off.
We already have at the public service level.
Oh, sorry. Okay, perfect. So,
You've sent it-
We have
Have we
not
sent it
communicated
to-
directly with elected officials.
Have we sent it to cabinet and the premier, sir?
We have not communicated it directly to any elected officials. We have passed it up to our colleagues on the sustainability working group at the provincial level.
Have we shared it, sir, with municipalities associations of the province?
Not in any detail, no.
just make a comment on that, Mr. Chairman. I have an executive committee meeting on Tuesday where we've added this topic to the agenda, and certainly it's an open meeting tonight, so certainly I'll send this out in the morning to the members of that committee so they have it as well.
All right.
But I would make that motion that I'd certainly make that motion that. I'll make that motion that we send this presentation tonight to the members, certainly of the Southern Regional Caucus and the Premier's office.
Do I have a seconder on that?
Send the presentation.
Yeah.
So, all those in favor? Thank you very much, folks, and thank you again, staff, for your presentation. And receive the file, any opposed? All right, we'll take that to, please. Secretary, receive the file. Thank you kindly, all those in favor? Thank you kindly. How about item 1.4, 2021 proposed draft general capital budgets? Everyone read into that before we go to Craig, please?
Please.
Thank you.
This will be the second, I guess, iteration of the two-year capital budget that the Finance Committee will have seen. So the draft capital budget, the second version, represents over $50 million of investment over the next 2 years. And it really takes advantage to the greatest extent possible of leveraging funding from other levels of government. So out of this $50 million capital budget, two-year capital budget, $29 million is proposed to come from other levels of government for programs that are aligned with the city's strategic investment priorities. The budget not only heavily focuses on investing in our core infrastructure and asset management principles for assets that are beyond our useful life, but the capital budget also sets aside funds for strategic investments in the Central Peninsula. It provides an opportunity to commence Phase 1 of a district energy project. It provides an opportunity to invest in a deep energy retrofit program headed by Mr. Yamin that will see the city reduce its reliance on energy sources. It provides an opportunity to refurbish the seawall and invest in Fundy Key as a major milestone towards unlocking potential development opportunities, and a significant investment in a new ERP system for the City of Saint John that will drive future customer service processes. This two-year capital budget is aligned with the draft 10-year capital investment plan, which we'll bring back to the Finance Committee in Q3, and it supports the objectives that have set forth by the Finance Committee to reduce the infrastructure deficit by 25% over the next 10 years. So with that, I'll turn things over to Mr. Levine from our Finance Department to walk through the update. He will also provide an update on the two-year capital budget for the utility fund.
Thank you, Commissioner. To you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Finance Committee. This is just a highlight. We've seen this slide before, but just to highlight some of our capital budget inputs, and that would come from the Asset Management Plan, Central Peninsula Neighborhood Plan, Capital Budget Policy, Climate Change, and of course, Council Priorities. Our 10-year draft long-term capital plan is well underway, and we anticipate it to be completed by end of Q3. Service areas have submitted their 2020 to 2029 submissions. Our 2020 and 2021 capital budget is based on our draft long-term capital plan. And again, some of the capital plan inputs are the asset management plan, long-term financial plan, our debt management policy, capital budget policy, and our operating budget policy. The 2020-2021 capital budget includes the following financial principles that were adopted by the Finance Committee. And that is to target a 25% reduction in our infrastructure deficit over the next 10 years, increase pay-as-you-go annually, reduce our general fund debt by 25% for the next 10 years, and increase contributions to capital 10% per year. Also, in this updated draft budget, the city is working on securing additional infrastructure funding, hopefully to be financed at the next, or hopefully to be finalized at the next Finance Committee. As Commissioner Fudge stated, this draft capital budget is just over 50 million over 2 years. City share would be 21.4 million over 2 years and 10.99 2020 and 10.49 in 2021, and you can see that focus is on reducing our borrowing. Others' share is just slightly over 29 million for over 2 years, and that includes the gas tax funding, which also includes the additional top-up funding announced, disaster mitigation funding that has been secured, our reserves, which includes our fleet reserve, our IT reserve, as well as capital reserves, bilateral funding, which I'm going to go through a presentation after this one to give you an update on that one. Pay-as-you-go, we have budgeted 1.9 million in our 2020 operating, and we anticipate budgeting 3.2 in the 2021. And additional federal funding is also to be confirmed, and that's just slightly over 3 million over 2 years. And as Commissioner Fudge alluded to, that's for our deep municipal energy retrofit and our district energy phase 1, particularly focusing on the Market Square complex. And here's a highlight of the proposed changes from the previous version. I'll touch base on some of the high ones. Funding key seawall, we're going to spread that a little bit differently, still over 2 years. We're going to reduce the 2020 by 1.3. Canada Games Aquatic Center, we're going to delay some windows and some exterior work for 350. The deep municipal energy retrofit, we've added $1.1 million. And the district energy phase 1 Market Square was 2.4 million, as well as increasing our asphalt renewal program by 1.17 million. And then the summary of 2021 proposed changes. Again, we're going to add back the funded key seawall refurbishment of 1.3 million. Canada Games Aquatic Center, again, we're going to delay some windows and exterior work there for 300,000. The deep municipal energy retrofit is 1.04 million. District Energy Phase 1 Market Square, an additional 2.4, and then as well as our asphalt renewal program, we're going to increase that by just a little over $1 million. Saint John Water. This is basically the same slide we presented the first time around. There has been no changes to the budget. So just quickly, capital from operating over 2 years will be $10.2 million. Heavy reliance on funding from other sources, 15.9 over 2 years, and that's disaster mitigation funding, gas tax funding, and bilateral. And I just wanted to emphasize again that there will be no new borrowing for the utility for the 2020 and the 21 capital program. And on that, we are asking the Finance Committee to recommend both proposed draft utility fund budget and the proposed draft general fund budget be presented to Common Council with a recommendation to receive and file. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
All right, thanks, Greg. Thank you very much. I firstly just want to note that the budget again is early this year. We brought it early last year. Council seemed to think that saved money when we went out for tender. I'm glad that it's here again at a much earlier time than it was in say, our first term. And secondly, it's kind of groundbreaking. This is your first 2-year capital budget, and we should be doing longer, but this is their first 2-year capital budget. So thank you again, staff. Any questions, please?
But what's our proportionate regional facilities, 60 something? I can never remember.
It's based on population, 67%
So,
for operating.
yeah,
Yes.
so 33% is, of operating at regional facilities is paid
By participating communities.
by participating communities. So in this 2-year capital budget, there's $1,011,000 of regional facilities. So 33% of that, if we eventually choose to move forward with some form of the New Deal, because included in the New Deal was capital, and it would be a little more than this because that also brings in the LSDs into the capital, but that would be $333,630 that we would not have to borrow over the next 2 years to do these projects.
Yeah, with the participation of the LSDs, that 67% would decline down to about 60% for the city of St. John.
To 60.
60, correct.
Okay, so that's an even $400,000. So, as we go through this waiting period while we're discussing things and going to reevaluate, I mean, these are real dollars for the city of St. John that are currently there. Hopefully, we beef it up a little bit to get more, but just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Just very quickly, I mean, $50 million worth of prioritized capital work, growth-focused, climate-focused, a number of really great projects here with the city share being $21 million. Well done. Well done. Thank you.
Councillor Norton?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't help but think of Councillor Armstrong and his excitement seeing this come out early. With that, I know he says in the past, and I'm sure he'll say it again, that it does save us money going out to market earlier. Have we been able to capture that or quantify that or prove that in any way, shape, or form that this extra effort to get this done will result in dollars saved for the taxpayer?
Yeah, I think that we can probably bring back an analysis. What we would look at is the estimates that we've assumed that projects would cost.
Right.
And we come back with what they actually cost, and we would have to make the assumption that taking advantage of the market and the timing contributed to the surpluses that we're seeing.
Okay. Kevin, in terms of just when I go through it, in terms of where monies are allocated, like if you were just to put them in buckets like recreation, transportation, environmental services, those sorts of things, regional facilities, what's the smallest bucket that the capital budget probably contributes to now? Would it be recreation, leisure services? I guess the reason why I'm asking the question is it's not that I understand that some needs are greater within our network. At the same time, I guess what I'm looking at is some of those things that obviously make us competitive too. So parks and public spaces are assets that make it attractive for new development and for the real estate market to turn over and folks to settle. Sometimes, obviously, when you turn the taps on, you want the water to flow. But are you able to kind of break that down to a pie chart or give me kind of?
We can certainly bring something back for information purposes. I would like to highlight, though, in terms of how we put this budget together, we're really focusing on existing infrastructure,
right.
Existing capital, and really relying on the asset management data to drive those decisions. So it's not so much, how much are we putting in for this type of service or that type of service.
Okay.
It's ensuring that the services we do have are protected and maintained so that we can continue providing those services. And then with respect to over and above that, we would look at any growth or new services under a strategic growth lens. So it's a different way of looking at our capital.
For sure, no, and certainly support that. So, thank you to the work for you and your team.
Anything else? Well, I just want to further recognize that, and Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, please, that we don't see the water rate increasing in this budget.
We are just finalizing, well, we'll be coming back, Brett, Mr. McGovern will be coming back with some new rate structures this year. So we're not borrowing any new money for the capital budget, but when it comes to actual water rates, that'll be a conversation.
All right, I apologize, I
Yeah.
misread that.
Yeah.
I was hoping the water rate wasn't going up because we weren't bothering. Yeah, right, okay. And secondly, we are reducing every year for the reliance on borrowing. You saw the slide. And again, we have an assessment asset policy, and it relates to this capital, these capitals, member 2 budgets. So thank you very much, staff. So there is a motion to,
The recommendations, should they need these ever?
not as far as that, yeah. And seconded, thank you, sir. All those in favor? And those opposed, thank you so much. Craig, you're back up again for 1.5 bilateral funding application.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to give Finance Committee a quick update on a funding application that we recently submitted. So an introduction, in 2017, the Government of Canada announced a $33 billion 10-year funding agreement with the provinces and territories under 4 different funding streams. They allocated $20.1 billion for public transit, $9.2 billion for green infrastructure, $1.3 billion for community, cultural, and recreation infrastructure, and $2 billion for a wide-ranging infrastructure needs in rural and northern communities. The province of New Brunswick signed the bilateral agreement in March of 2018. The agreement will provide more than $673 million in federal funding over the next decade. Projects will be cost shared between the federal, provincial, and municipal levels of government. The cost sharing is broken up as follows. Federal portion would be up to 40%, provincial portion would be a minimum of 33%, and the municipal portion would be a minimum of 27%. And the overall plan focuses on investments through the climate lens. Climate change mitigation and adaptation must be considered for a proposed investment. The province issued a call for proposals on May 7th of this year under the bilateral agreement for the following funding streams: green infrastructure, community, cultural, and recreation infrastructure, and rural and northern communities infrastructure. Submissions were due by June 28th, and the City of Saint John submitted 2 expressions of interest. One would be the Fundy Key project, total value of $38 million, and green infrastructure with a total value of just over $40 million. Both of these projects focuses on climate change, adaptation, resilience, and disaster mitigation, environmental quality, as well as tax-based growth for the city and infrastructural renewal. The Fundy Key redevelopment was proposed $38.6 million over 5 years. Federal share would be just over $15 million, provincial share would be just short of $13 million, and the city's share would be $10.4 million. And the scope of the project on the Fundy Key site would be the soil remediation, coastal flood protection and structural stability advancement, as well as Loyalist Plaza upgrades, pedway connections, waterfront promenade, as well as district energy. Successful funding would ensure the site is ready for development, ensuring future tax-based growth, and is able to adapt to climate change. As well, as I said, the city's share was just over $10 million, and that would be spread over 5 years, so it's very affordable. Project scope under the bilateral application is currently not part of our draft 10-year capital plan. The seawall is, but under the bilateral, we didn't include the seawall. Upon successful funding application, staff would bring forth a business plan per the capital budget policy for a formal council approval, and as well as recommendation on how the city would fund the project would be part of the business plan to ensure debt levels stay within the general fund debt management policy. The second application was our green infrastructure, was just over $40 million over 6 years. Federal share is just over $16 million, provincial share just over $13 million, and the city share would actually be spread between the general fund, which would be approximately $5.4 million, as well as the utility fund, and these are your street reconstruction projects. The project scope was about just shy of 8 kilometers of storm separation with a focus in the Uptown and Central Peninsula. Projects include new underground infrastructure, rebuilt roadways, as well as sidewalks and street beautification. Focus on key growth areas that have had possible restriction on development due to the age of the current infrastructure, which the majority dates back over 100 years, was the focus. The strategic investment in green infrastructure would optimize the use of these assets, improve environmental performance, and importantly, support the growth of the urban core and priority growth areas, making these areas more sustainable and attractive to development. And as I said, the city share would be split between the general fund and the utility fund at just over $5 million apiece. The 2020 and the 21 capital budget includes just shy of $3.9 million city share related to these funds, projects funded under the bilateral agreement.
That one higher, I wonder.
The general fund has $2 million and the utility is just
33 cents.
$1.8
No, it's
million.
for city share. No, you're right.
These
Sorry.
projects were also identified under the capital management plan,
Thank you.
as well as part of the capital budget policy. As well as these were all included, they all fall under the long-term capital plan. Successful funding would mean more separation would be done sooner if we receive the funding. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Again, committee, any questions, comments, please? No? Okay. I just have one comment. You noted in the capital budget that we just had a motion on that twice mentioned the aquatic center was without some funding and would be looked at a different time. And it's actually looked in. It's in these figures as well. So we're not forgetting about the aquatic center. Of those people that were worried about it, it's actually it's reverted into this Infrastructure Canada agreement.
Point of clarity, Mr. Chairman, I guess, so these are applications at this stage, Commissioner?
Yes.
So it's, I assume we work within parameters, we try to find projects that are important for the growth of the city, and we make application, and we'll sit and wait and see what happens? Is that?
Absolutely. There's no commitment by the City of Saint John. We are in application phase. The application and the projects were highly concentrated on projects that we were going to do anyway with respect to the 10-year long-term capital investment plan. So if we're successful, we'll come back and we'll provide that information to this Finance Committee to make a decision.
And they are looking at it. It's about, very rough figures, about 27 cents of the dollar.
That's correct.
Yeah. All right. Do I need a motion here, sir, for just receive and file? Would
File.
that be fine, please? May I have? I'm sorry, Councillor Norton.
Yeah, no,
Apologize.
just one question.
Right.
Through you, Chair, to Craig. In terms of like when we're looking at things like green infrastructure in terms of where we spread that money or that, will that be concentrated in one area of the city or the other? Are all wards going to benefit from that? Is it going to be uptown? Like when we look at some of those dollars that are coming in, some of those projects, obviously fund a key project, we know what that is, but some of the other dollars, I guess what you're hearing, the undertone, what you're hearing is you're hearing a ward councillor fight for his ward. So.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly, the asset management becomes a big part of that. This is green infrastructure, storm sewer being a big part of this agreement. The oldest infrastructure, unfortunately, is in the uptown core. A lot of it well over 100 years old that needs to be updated and replaced. And, it's one of those projects that sort of the biggest bang for your buck because we do storm sewer separation. Now we can rebuild the road, new sidewalks. So, I mean, if it was a different green project or funding available, certainly, where that need is the greatest, where that infrastructure need is the greatest. So is it saying it would just be the uptown core? No, there's probably other infrastructure, and Brian could speak to that, but, the majority of, unfortunately for this particular one is in the uptown core.
That's due to the fact that that's where the revitalization and the rehabilitation is needed.
Well, the infrastructure is just so old.
It's like Craig said, the oldest infrastructure.
To the mic, please.
In the uptown. So just to verify what Craig was saying about the older infrastructure, it is indeed in the uptown, but there are needs, deed requirements to do separation in the other areas of the city too, you know, the west and the east as well, but it'll come with time.
No, thank you. I guess, like, as new funding opportunities come forward, that I understand that our core is important, whether it's the human body or whether it's in the city, but just to make sure that that areas of the city that contribute large amounts of the residential tax base receive something. And I know what's fair is not always equal, and what's equal is not only always fair, but that we don't forget about those other areas of the city that in many ways help us pay our way.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have a comment, City Manager?
Sure, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, it was mentioned in the brief, but I believe it bears repeating as another consideration. We were constrained in terms of what options we could look at when we asked for this funding. It's not funding whereby we can ask for anything that happens to be on our priority for capital renewal or new infrastructure. There were some very strict guidelines put in place in terms of what could be considered and not. And what we wanted to ensure is that our submissions actually had a reasonable chance of success. And therefore, we did conform to the criteria that were laid out within these various funding envelopes.
So moved.
That's the final, submission of the evening. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Night market is on now.
Sweet.